present our webinar called Making It Stick, Planning for Retention. My name is Jackie. I will be your host for today's webinar. I have a couple of details to review before we get started. If you have questions, please submit your questions via the Q&A box on your screen. Make sure to include myself, the host, so I can track those questions to review with Anita at the end of the session. Secondarily, if we run into technical difficulties, please send me a message. I will do all that I can to help you get sorted out. We find sometimes with these webinars that you may run into a hiccup with the audio broadcasting if lots of people at your school site are all accessing the internet at the same time. If you run into trouble and it's kind of spotty and drifting in and out, you can send me a message. I can send you the phone number to call into the audio via traditional phone. Also, please remember, if we run into trouble or if you run into trouble with audio and can't get that sorted out, the webinar is being recorded. We will email a link to everybody early next week once it's available that you can access and share with your colleagues and review and go back to if you have questions. All that said, I'm going to get you connected here with Anita Archer.
Thank you, Jackie. Well, thank all of you on this Friday afternoon. For some of you, late on Friday afternoon if you're on the East Coast. And I was thinking about the topic, which is making it stick, all about practice and how we have to plan for it so it'll make a difference. And it's kind of appropriate that it is on a late Friday afternoon because sometimes we don't attend to Friday as much as we do Monday, and we don't attend to practice as much as we do initial instruction. So we are going to look at the big ideas on practice and the research that looks at what we can do to ensure that students are not just introduced to material, but actually retain it. This is one of my favorite topics because when I look at what we do as teachers to raise students up to a desired level of performance, we certainly use instruction, maybe even very explicit instruction in initial lessons. And during those lessons, we give them feedback, and we might even add some scaffolding to get them up to the desired level of practice or performance. But we may not attend to the fourth arrow there, which is practice. Because I could give initial instruction, give you very good feedback on it, even have some scaffolding to lift you up to desired level of performance. But if I don't have enough practice to dig deep neural pathways to retention in permanent memory, it may just all be for naught. So it's useful that we talk about practice. And I was just sitting here reflecting as we were waiting to start on 2 weeks ago. I was in Australia, and I had the great gift of spending 2 of my days in Australia teaching beautiful little Aussies in elementary environments, in their primary environments, thinking about some of the things that I taught and what might happen if that last leg of practice was not added. So one of the things that I got to teach was in second grade, grade 2 there, how to give change in Australian coins. Well, first I had to get out the coins and learn what the coins were worth and who were the pictures on them and what were the animals on them. So I got to learn. But I taught a lesson. We learned how to count on as a way to figure out the amount of change that we should receive. And we practiced it. I modeled it and modeled it. We practiced it together and practiced it together. Then they practiced it. But if the teacher doesn't return to it and give more practice of that information, it is likely to drop from their repertoire. Now, giving and getting change probably won't because the universe somewhat reinforces it over time, and they would want to get the right amount of change. But some of the other things I taught One was how to write a summary using a strategy, making a list of the content, cross out on the list. On second reflection, what is not a useful fact. Being able to connect the facts together so that you have more complex sentences, being able then to number the items and then put it in coherent English after you write a topic sentence. It was a great lesson, great kids, grade 5, perfect. But one time doing that strategy, even though it's very powerful, isn't going to make enough difference unless there is more practice on it in subsequent lessons. So that is the big idea. So let us make this a wonderful Friday afternoon as I join you, and we'll learn more about what we need to do in all those cases to make it stick. We know, as Willingham said, it is virtually impossible to become proficient at a mental task without extended practice. And I can tell you that has been true in my life, whether it is algebra, whether it is playing my cello, whether it is learning a new card game. Without extended practice, I did not become proficient. Use it or lose it. Well, that is certainly true. I will tell you a funny story. I was in a high school class this year, and they were reporting having read a lot of poetry, and they were to select who their favorite poet was. When it came one girl's turn, she said, well, of all of the poets we've studied, my favorite is Anonymous, because Anonymous enjoys different types of poetry. And I just loved what the teacher did. And she said, well, you know, that is the benefit of poems that are anonymous, that we don't know who wrote them, that there's a whole different range, all different types, so we do have a definite amount of variety there. Without humiliating that child or anything, it was just such a beautiful moment. But here, the truth is, if we don't use it, we will lose it. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to quit demifying and putting down practice. I can't tell you how many teachers have said to me, well, you know, Anita, that is just drill and kill, drill and kill. You know, we have not one reported incident of any child dying of practice, not one. I'm sitting in front of a group of students in algebra and saying, you know, let's do a few more of those problems so we really get down how to solve this type of equation. Dead. I am working with a group of third graders in intervention. Let's reread this paragraph and see if we can read it at the rate of speech, at an appropriate rate. And everyone in the group dead. Not one reported incident internationally evening, death by practice. And it's really not true. The truth is, it's drill and skill, that the students gain skill from that practice. And I'll tell you, when I master something, it's drill and thrill. So we're going to leap over all those barriers of negativity that we put on practice and say, there's no learning without it, and there is no thrill in mastery unless we have practiced. So when we look at practice, there are a number of purposes for it. And I'm going to involve you. It's Friday. We all need to be involved. So I'm going to read. When I stop, you say the next word. One purpose, to gain minimum competency on a skill. So when I was teaching those kids how to count change, first thing I was looking for was accuracy and some minimum competency. Now, if I would come back the next day and extend that lesson, then my hope would be to improve and gain proficiency on a skill. The third one, particularly for foundation skills, is critical, and that is for the students to gain automaticity. In fact, I'm going to take just a little side trip about automaticity, and we'll come back to this. So automaticity is really necessary for foundation skills. On next Monday, I am going to be in Montana and I'm going to be working with all elementary teachers about writing. And my message to them is, please don't forget the foundation skills. We know if you cannot write with automaticity or type with automaticity, it's going to interfere with the quality of your product. If you cannot read with automaticity, it's going to interfere with comprehension. If you cannot spell with automaticity, it's going to interfere with the quality of your product. So let's look at that a little more in depth. So I love Willingham's work. If you have never read the book, Why Students Don't Like School, you should rush out and order it. So it has this very simple model of the mind, that we have working memory and that we have long-term memory. And it is in working memory that we have awareness and thinking. That often pulls information from the environment and pulls information from permanent memory. But the challenge is that it appears that we have limited space in working memory. And so, even though we have abundant, unmeasurable space in permanent memory, we have limited space in working memory. And this is why it's so important that we provide practice to take children to automaticity on foundation skills. And the reason is pretty simple. So let's look at these examples. So if I am reading and my decoding is not automatic, and that means that I stop and I have to figure out words, I have to sound them out, I have to look at the word parts to figure out the pronunciation. That's taking up space in my working memory and is reducing the amount of cognitive energy I can put on comprehension. So when math facts are automatic, then we have space available for solving equations and problems. But if it's not automatic, too much of the energy, too much space within working memory is taken up with figuring out those facts. Same thing with keyboarding or handwriting. When keyboarding and handwriting are automatic, then space is available in working memory for writing that product. I use a cello example. When first position notes on cello are automatic, then I can move my cognitive focus to the tone, to the rhythm, to the song that I am playing. When facts are actually automatic and I can pull them up as I am reading, it's also going to help comprehension. So one of the reasons that we have practice is to build automaticity, competency, proficiency, automaticity, and for all of us to protect against forgetting. And so recently I had the gift of preparing for going to my 50th high school reunion. I know that's shocking to you, but I had not done any practice for 50 years. And I got to see what happens when you have no practice. I had no automaticity. So I decided I'd better practice. So I got out the yearbook. And I knew if I just read their names and I looked at their pictures again and again, that I probably wouldn't remember them. So after some initial reading through it, I put Post-its over every single picture. And I would look at the picture, try to retrieve the name of the person. And about a week before the reunion occurred, I was looking good. I just hoped that they looked the same. And I hoped not only did they look the same, but none of the women had gotten married so that they had their original maiden name. But I really got to see how lack of practice led to forgetting, how practice would have protected me from forgetting. And of course, if we learn one skill, another purpose of practice is transfer of that skill to another context, to other examples, to other tasks. So these are why we provide practice. And it differs with different things that we are teaching. what is the desire of the outcome of practice. But here are the things that we're going to look at that research says, please consider these to improve the actual outcome of practice in terms of learning and retention. Learning and retention are our goals. And so when we look at the research, these are the elements that we're going to look at. I'm sure you're very familiar with some of them, but we are simply not attending to them. So we're going to look at deliberate practice, retrieval practice, when I gain the information from memory, distributed or spaced practice, in initial instruction having some variation within the practice, and then after we have some level of proficiency, having it mixed with other items that represent other learning from the domain so that the students have, again, a higher probability of retention. So let's leap on these, and we're going to start with deliberate practice. This has been interesting for me to study because some of the best research was done actually on people playing string instruments. And what kind of practice did they do? Did they just try to fill the time, or did they say, okay, I want to work on this, I want to improve on this? The second being deliberate practice. So this is one way deliberate practice could be defined. So don't forget, when I stop, say the next word. Deliberate practice is goal-oriented practice, consciously devoted to improvement of a skill. So if I sit down at my cello and I say, I'm really going to work on being able to transfer from one string to another, that's what I'm going to concentrate on. That intentionality significantly lifts up the quality of that practice. So let us just look at an extended definition from Hattie and Yates, one of my favorite Hattie books, the third one, and it's time devoted to learning activities where a skill is being developed, and it has these conditions: guidance, it has, most importantly for deliberate, target goals. I want to learn this, I want to be better at that. And it is often then has feedback and assessment, did you get it? But it is a conscious mental focus. I am writing, and today I intend to add more transition words, but not always at the beginning of the sentence, embedded within some of the sentences. I am counting change, and today I want to count the change without lining it up in order from least value to most value. That's what deliberate practice is, and that is something that teachers can do on a daily basis to improve practice. Make it deliberate. So let's just do a little activity here. So you have down deliberate practice. So maybe one teacher says, listen, as you write your paragraphs today, I want you to stop and reread the paragraph to be sure it makes sense. And then we have been looking at transition words and phrases, and I want you to use transition words and phrases to make it flow from idea to idea to idea, like a beautiful flowing river. It goes from one idea to the next. Now, just oppose that to saying something like, using your paragraph plan, write a paragraph. See, I could write a paragraph day after day after day, but without some intentionality, without some deliberate practice, I might not make a difference in my performance. So we start right away with something that teachers can do every day they give any assignment, is be certain that there is some intentionality to improve performance, to reach a higher level of proficiency, and making it very obvious to students what they're to attend to. Well, this is my favorite one. I don't know why, but I have really been using and spending my year focusing on retrieval practice. So I'm going to read when I stop, say the next word. Retrieval practice is a strategy in which calling information to mind subsequently enhances and boosts learning. Deliberately recalling information forces us to pull our knowledge out and examine what we know. So retrieval practice is, let's say I'm learning American history. Retrieval practice would not be reading the chapter again. Retrieval practice would not be answering the teacher's questions with notes in front of me. Retrieval practice would be answering questions with no notes in front of me, where I had to retrieve it from my mind. And it's such a powerful tool to use as a teacher, reviewing with the students, using retrieval practice versus just reiterating what we have covered. So one of the most striking findings, research findings, is the power of active retrieval, testing to strengthen memory, and that the more effortful the retrieval, the stronger the benefit. I guess that I had very effortful retrieval practice on the names for my reunion, and so now I have them down because it was more effortful. So retrieval practice basically is, let's just compare two things. So I have taught you how to do a math algorithm, and the next day I give you a problem to do that is unscaffolded, and you do it. That would be retrieval practice. Versus I have taught you how to do a certain algorithm in math, and the next day you come in and I give you a problem, and we work through it step by step together. Now, it's not that that step-by-step guided practice that we do is not useful. It's just that after I've taught it and we've done, I do it and we do it and you do it, I need to then have you do it unscaffolded. So you have to rely on your memory, strengthening the depth of your neural pathways for retention. Now, when we look at this, here are some examples. And I'm going to read them to you, and I'm going to give you a moment to think which one would be actual retrieval practice. In fact, we'll do it on each one. Is this retrieval practice or not? So every Friday, Mr. Davison reviews vocabulary and the big ideas covered in social studies in the past 2 weeks. First, the students reread their vocabulary logs and explain entries to their partners. Next, students write summaries using their notes. So think, would that be retrieval practice or not? Or not, right. It's not retrieval practice because the students aren't having to do it from memory. So instead of studying their vocabulary, they are where they might look at the word, have to think of the meaning, and then on the back of the flashcard, look at the actual meaning. That would be retrieval practice. But here, they have the material in front of them, and they're teaching it to their partner. And that is a very good thing to have kids do. But after you've got them to a certain level of proficiency, they'll benefit more from retrieval practice. They're writing a summary from their notes. So that's a good thing to do too. But if we're looking at improving retention, we might have them do a quick write where they have to write down what they know about the topic without notes, without the book, without an anchor chart, without. So they are doing it from memory. Of course, it'll be enhanced if they get feedback on it. Okay, let's look at the next one. Every Friday, Mr. Danielson gives an open book quiz. The first items involve use of vocabulary within the context of social studies. The remaining items focus on the big ideas and their significance in history. The quiz is graded in class, augmented with class discussion. Is this retrieval practice or not? I bet you're saying not, because it is here an open book quiz. So the students have a question, and they can go through their book and try to locate the information. So what it's really measuring is how quickly you can locate, not necessarily do you remember it. And so that kind of practice is probably not going to really enhance the actual retention of the students because it's very, very scaffolded. Well, every Friday, Mr. Danson gives a closed book quiz, covering vocabulary taught in the past 2 weeks, plus critical vocabulary from the past units. The remaining items focus on the big ideas and their significance. The quiz is graded in class and augmented with class discussion. Well, it's the only one left, so you knew it probably had to be retrieval practice. But there is a difference between an open book and a closed book test, because the closed book test, they will have to retrieve it from memory. In fact, this is even spaced a little bit 2 weeks later, and so they're going to be a little bit more effortful, and that is going to make the retrieval practice even stronger in terms of retention. Well, there are many, many, many ways that we could use the idea of retrieval practice. But here's the big idea. Retrieval practice makes learning stick far better than just re-exposure to the original material. So I've taught it, and then 2 days later, I just go over and reiterate what we've already learned. That's going to make less difference than I have taught it, and 2 days later, I'm going to ask you questions on it and have you retrieve it. Now, of course, if you don't know the information, I will, of course, tell you the information. Of long-term memory, so that we are really digging those deep neural pathways for retention. So here is a little study that showed this. So this is an 8th grade science class, and it was done with 8th graders in a number of science classes, but in one science class, and one portion of the material the students would get quizzes on as they completed that information. And another portion, an equal portion of the material, they went back and the teacher just recapped with them, just reviewed it. Let's go over this again and recap the most critical information. So I have been introduced to material and I get a quiz on it, requiring that I have retrieval practice. I have been taught information, and the teacher just goes back and reiterates the big points 3 times. Well, the results were interesting. In fact, this would be a great study if you wanted a good action research study to duplicate. So on the material that was quizzed, on a final at the end of the period or at the end of the term, they had an A- versus a C+. Big difference in terms of retaining the information. So we know from many parallel studies that retrieval practice definitely makes a difference. And so here are just some examples of activities that are retrieval. And so let's just, I just picked out a few of these to talk about. And so one day a teacher in social studies said to me, you know, Anita, I teach this information, we read this information, but the students aren't remembering the information. And so we sat down and designed a little plan where there would be more retrieval practice leading up to the unit test. So we added short quizzes on Friday, where we had one short answer that they had to answer on new material. We had 3 multiple choices on new material and one short answer on old material, but also it included new material within it. So we had a mixture of what we had recently been learning and a few items from the past. But it was a quiz, closed book. The students had to retrieve it, and then they got feedback and self-corrected their quiz. But the end result was that we had significantly higher gains on the test, where it was when the students had the quizzes. So another kind of review would be what is often referred to as rapid retrieval practice. And here I was teaching a group of second graders, second or third, about irregular verbs. And so I had taught them, today I speak, yesterday I spoke. Today I write, yesterday I wrote. But then I came back about 3 days later, and we did quick retrieval. And so if it is a verb in the present tense, you're going to put your hand down like this. If it is in the past tense, you're going to put it back like this. Present, past. We're not going to do future, okay? And so, be my students. I'm going to say it, the first sentence, and then you're going to have to say it with me, but then complete the second sentence, all right? Today I speak, yesterday I spoke. Today I write, yesterday I wrote. Today I go, yesterday I went. Today I drink, yesterday I drank. So very fast-paced retrieval. Now, when I was in Australia, one of the things that is happening in many of their classes is they will have a retrieval practice session where they will go back and actively review with retrieval practice and interactive review with responses very quickly, things that they have learned in the past. And then when the students master it, they remove it from their special review PowerPoint, put in new information, but they come back to it. And so about 10 minutes a day, depending on the domain, they do this rapid retrieval. Well, not surprising, the students are remembering much more from the fact it is retrieval and also because it is spaced out over time. Well, we could do a quick write. And so if I had just taught information about Abe Lincoln in the last few days, I might say, get ready and write for 2 minutes and write B, things that we learned about Abe Lincoln. Or maybe I have taught you the steps in the strategy, and I ask you to write down the steps in the strategy. So a quick write could be used for retrieval practice. This is from a class I visited. The teacher wanted the students to know the parts of a plant in terms of reproduction. And so the students studied the plant, this drawing, and then the teacher said, cover it up, and you have 2 minutes to write down and draw and label as much as you can. When they were done, they counted up the parts they had drawn, the labels they had added, they put those two together, and they actually graphed it. The next day when I came in, at the very beginning of the lesson, the teacher said, take out your drawing of the plant. Again, take a moment to study it, cover it up, get ready for your 2-minute draw, and they draw it, and then they had to count the parts, and they had to count the labels. Well, what happened was some students, hard to believe, but were actually studying. Yep. They were studying. Middle school students were studying this so that they could do better every day and improve their graph. But it is perfect retrieval practice. It is from memory that they were drawing and labeling. So that's there for you to see if you could do it. Another type of retrieval practice every one of our participants have used, and that is flashcards. But flashcards can be used appropriately or not in terms of learning. So last year, I popped on a plane from New York City to Portland, Oregon, where my home is, though I'm not ever there, but I do have a home in Portland. And I sat in my usual seat, which is 8A, if it's United. And the middle seat was empty. And so I'm sitting there putting up my middle seat prayer, and a young woman sits down. And she is a freshman at a high school in Portland, and her father has just taken her for spring vacation to New York City. And she fell asleep. And about 2 hours later, she woke up, and she took out her iPhone. And she had flashcards on her iPhone. And I watched her. She read the word, read the definition, read the word, 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 the definition. And when she finished, she went back and she read the word, the definition, the word, and the definition. Not one bit of retrieval practice. And so I had to say to myself, should I intervene? Yes. So I said to her, hi, I'm Dr. Archer, and I'm sitting here working on a webinar, which I was, on practice. And I just thought maybe something I knew about practice might be helpful for you. Well, she had no choice. She was in the middle seat. So I taught her how to use her app where she had taken time to put the word and the definition in. And I said, what you're doing is just rereading it, and you get the illusion that you're learning it. But it would be better if you would look at the word and then with whatever effort is necessary, try to retrieve the word or any association you have to it. Get that brain working hard, and then look at the definition for feedback. And then put up the next word and study it. Try to retrieve the definition and give an example about it. And if you just cannot find it in your brain, you cannot retrieve it, then check the answer. This retrieval practice will make a big difference. So she was in the middle seat. So she started studying and then quizzed herself, and she got them right after a good deal of practice, retrieval practice. Well, then she got up and she went to the restroom and came back. And then she had her father move over and sit in the middle seat. And I tell you, I had so much more to share. But the most important thing I could share was retrieval practice and how she could adapt it to her flashcards. Well, what else do we know about retrieval practice? So a teacher could use retrieval practice where I ask you a question and the students have to show with a hand signal what the answer is. They're having to retrieve it. So one of the days that I was in Australia, we had 4 words that I had taught, and I put them up and numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4. And I said, and we read the words again, I said, I'm going to tell you about a word, and you're going to think about what the meaning of the word is. Then you are going to form the number on your table, and when I say show me, you're going to put in the air. But they had to retrieve it. They had to think about it and retrieve it from permanent memory. So it was a very good way to get some additional practice after we had taught it and introduced it, and there was already some initial mastery of it. Then we pumped it up with retrieval practice. Well, let's just remember why we want to do retrieval, not just rehashing information, but retrieval. Well, retrieval practice has benefits, and one benefit is learning and more retention. And if it is a little bit effortful, you have to really think and dig for it, then you're going to have stronger learning and stronger retention. And if there is a little space between the introduction and the retrieval practice, and maybe even subsequent retrieval practice, that is going to be lead to more learning and more retention. So retrieval practice leads to learning, effortful even more, and delayed even more. Well, if we repeat that retrieval practice, maybe in 1 week we do it, 1 day we do it, in 1 week we do it, in 1 month we do it, so it's repeated more than once, then we have more learning. Well, if we are given feedback, there's even more learning. And so let's look at each of these and decide if it's retrieval practice or not. So I'm going to read it, you be thinking about it. We have learned how to change a fraction into a decimal. So they've already had instruction on how to change a fraction into a decimal. And the teacher says, watch me change 3/7 into a decimal. So the teacher demonstrates how to change 3/7 into a decimal and how to place the decimal correctly. And then says, now it's your turn. Change 5/8 into a decimal. Now, this would be very appropriate if it was initial instruction, where the teacher is demonstrating it and then maybe guiding the students in doing an item. But it wouldn't be as useful later on when you want retrieval practice, because immediately following a model is going to have very low retrieval value. Okay, let's try another one. Change 5/8 into a decimal. So that's the directive given to the students. They've already learned how to do this, and today, change 5/8 into a decimal. And the teacher monitors, and then for feedback, the teacher said, now let's do this together. This is retrieval practice, because the students had to retrieve how to change a fraction into a decimal without any scaffolding, without any support. So that is retrieval practice, but remember, it's strengthened by giving them feedback. So by doing the problem together, then they're going to get feedback on the steps. Now, as a whole group, some of the students would have it right, and that feedback will affirm them, and some of the students will have it wrong, and that will correct them. So that is a perfect example of retrieval practice. So we want practice that is deliberate. We want practice that involves retrieval, coming from our memory, not supported by something we're reading or a chart in front of us or a number line in front of us. We are retrieving it. The next one is one of the things that I'm sure we were introduced to in undergraduate career or even our master's programs, but we haven't really taken this to heart and done it. So in education, we usually refer to this as distributed practice. In cognitive science, it's always referred to as spaced practice. Same thing. So I'm going to say the next word. Distributed practice, also known as spaced. Not spaced, you can fix that up. Spaced practice is a learning strategy where practice is broken up into a number of short sessions over a longer period of time. Well, in every study that I was able to locate, when they held the amount of time constant for practice, and in one condition, it was masked in one session, like this example of 60 minutes of practice on a math algorithm versus distributed, maybe 30 minutes of practice, then one day later 15 minutes, and 1 week later 15 minutes of practice. Both of those, of course, add up to 60 minutes. But even though the total amount of practice time was the same, the retention significantly higher in the distributed or spaced practice. And not just a little difference in retention, as we're going to learn. So research favors spaced or distributed practice over mass practice. So there is one of the effect sizes that Hattie looked at when he was sort of looking for the holy grail of education. What would really make a difference? Well, effect size of 0.71 makes a difference. Not having it all masked in one session, but spaced over time. So read the next one with me. And this actually comes from my favorite book on cognitive psychology and practice called Making It Stick. Gains achieved in masked practice are transitory and melt away quickly. Gains achieved in masked practice, not spaced out, are transitory and melt away quickly. Wow, I put a lot of effort into teaching that lesson. I put a lot of effort in making that lesson work just to have it melt away because it wasn't distributed. I better really attend to the concept of distributed practice. And let me show you why. Same time, same effort, but you remember more if it was distributed. But it doesn't help just a little bit, it helps a lot. So this is probably the most important slide here in terms of the impact of spaced practice. Distributed learning in certain situations can double the amount you remember later on. Double the amount you remember later on. So I'm concerned about the beautiful little Aussie children that I taught because I taught an initial lesson, but I didn't have the benefit of doing distributed practice. So there's a high probability, unless a day or 2 days later, and then a week later, the teacher went back and did some additional practice on it, it's going to drop right out of their repertoire. Now think about that. We're putting a huge amount of energy into initial instruction. But if that initial practice is not followed with distributed practice, sort of all for naught. It's not going to make enough difference. Well, here's what it looks like in education. We have initial practice. I am teaching a new skill, such as being able to count change in Australian coins. And so I introduce it, I model it, and I do it. We do it together, we do it, and then you do it. But that's the last time I hear from it. So initial practice by itself is not adequate. We need to have that distributed or spaced practice, where we practice it in short sessions over time, which helps our retention in a variety of academic areas. And we might also put in some cumulative review. So maybe they've learned one spelling word and then another spelling word, and we go back constantly and review the ones they've learned in the past. Cumulative review. So what else do we know? Well, there are some studies that have actually been done on the amount of interval. So I taught it, and then I'm going to practice it. And when I do that additional practice, how much distance do I need to have? Well, it helps if it isn't immediately after it, like we have modeled it, and then I say, let's do that again. We might need to practice it again to get some initial proficiency, but that also needs to be matched with distributed or spaced practice. So it is enough time that there's going to be a little forgetting where you have to put in more effort. This seems our brains just love the work of it. But it can't be so much, as my example about the yearbook was, where it requires relearning of the material. I really only recognized 3 people and their names. Well, I have to confess, it's a school I only went to the last 2 years of my high school career. So it wasn't some group that I was with for 6 years, but I had major forgetting. And so that would be a little bit too far away. So now that I've learned the names, and the next one we're going to have is a 60th reunion, I think I'll just come back and one night a year, I'll go back and revisit it so that it's effortful, but I won't have to relearn it. Well, one group of researchers actually looked at this by changing the interval, changing it in many different ways to see what kind of interval might be effective. And for the information that's listed at the top, this was a good schedule. If I was learning information, like I was learning the element on the periodic chart, or maybe I'm learning vocabulary in an additional language, or maybe I'm learning scientific definitions, then a schedule such as this seems to be optimum. There's practice in the initial instruction, and then a day or 2 days later, there is additional practice, and then 1 week later, we might come back and have some brief practice on that same body of knowledge, and then 1 month later, we would come back. So 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, everybody. 1 day, 1 week, 1 month. But this is going to require planning. I'm going to have to make a schedule so that I do this. But if it could increase students by double, this is worth it, is actually sitting down and thinking and planning practice. In fact, here's an example. So I'm working at an elementary school, which has a core reading program, and they introduce on Monday the vocabulary for a new passage. And then they spend the rest of the week on comprehension exercises around that passage. They don't, in current practice, return to the vocabulary. So we just made a plan. You're going to introduce the words on Monday for the passage, and on Tuesday you might do 3 minutes of quick retrieval practice. It might even be the one I just modeled, where we have the names up, maybe on the wall, and they're numbered. And I say, I am thinking of a word. That means you look down the word and you find the word, and you put your hand on your desk, and I say, show me, and you hold it up. So that is what this group decided to do, is to have review on Tuesday as well as on Thursday. And the kids were doing very, 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 very well. In fact, we might even bring it down to 1 retrieval practice a week. And so we're going to move it till Wednesday and get rid of the other 2 and just do that one for the purpose of retention. This is later when we talk about a plan. This is what we want. We want like a plan, and not just oh, I hope I can spend some time doing it, but really a plan. Okay, so next, I'm introducing something new. And this is actually from a program that I reviewed in a school. And it is a non-example. It has no varied practice. So the teacher is teaching the final phonogram, the onset rhyme, and then introducing words. Can, jan, man, nan, tan, van, ban, jan, fan, ran. And so there is no variation here at all. And our brains love a little bit of change, a little difference as we're doing it. They also thrive on routines, but they also want occasionally things that are just a little bit novel to wake the mind up. And this certainly isn't. But this one would be. So let's look over at it. Now here, let's look at day 1. The students have learned and they're sounding out words like at and am and sam and ad and fan and man and rat. A range of vowel consonant and consonant vowel consonant words. So my brain is saying, oh, I've got to learn this. I've got to pay attention, because there's so much variation here in what we are doing. Now, the ones with an asterisk means that we're going to go back and spell those words. And so that adds more variation. And we're also going to read sentences. Some varied practice. Now, let's just look at what happens when the initial practice is not varied. So these are all real examples that I saw in curriculum. So look at the non-example of varied practice. Making, it's a spelling lesson. Make, bake plus ing equals baking. Rake plus ing equals raking. Make plus ing equals making. Break plus ing is breaking. I just want you to think, if the students had that as their initial practice, not very varied at all, what conclusions might they reach? Okay, so here were some of mine. They might reach the conclusion that this only applies if the word ends in vowel K-E, not any vowel consonant E, but vowel K-E. And of course, you can only use it if you're adding the ending ing. Certainly many kids would make that conclusion and really narrow the focus of that rule. But let's look at the next one. This was from another book. They were teaching the same skill. And they were teaching that when you had a word that ended in a vowel consonant E, and you want to add an ing that begins with the vowel, then drop the E. So we have ride plus ing, okay? And we have fame plus O-U-S. Ooh, it begins with a vowel, but not an I. So there's variation. Then we have excite plus ing. Yes, it is a vowel consonant E. We're going to drop the E before we add ing. But then we have excitement. Ooh, this is so very good because these are so close. I'm really going to have to think about this. Oh, my mind is just lighting up because I'm going to have to think. So I have excite plus ment. And yes, it ends in a vowel consonant E, but the ending does not begin with a vowel, so we don't drop the E, and we have excitement. Pretty exciting. So the whole idea here is that basically you all know the concept of examples and non-examples, so that the students really know the boundary of the concept. And that adds variety. That makes it so the mind, the brain has to be awake and processing this information. Well, what else do we know? And this is, I've taught some things mastery, and I need to give them additional practice. What kind of practice do I need to give? And mixed practice. And this term, interleaving, was a new one for me until I read many books on practice and many articles on practice. So let me just give you a perfect example that happened last spring. I was working with some wonderful teachers who were teaching 8th grade algebra. And one of the new ones I was sort of mentoring, visiting often, and I came to visit her classroom in May. Just weeks before the finals and the end of the school term. And so she said, Anita, you know, I have taught the unit test over the content in that unit. But yesterday, I gave them a practice test of all of the kind of items that we'd had all year long, and they were mixed up. And the students had passed the unit test, and their scores plummeted. What did I do wrong? And I said, well, no interleaving, no mixed practice, and mixed practice would have been so useful. She said, what can I do now? And I said, nothing, prepare for next year, because it needed to happen throughout the whole year. That when she taught a unit and then did a test, it would have been better to do a test that had items mixed in it from all the previous units. So the students would have to attend to what are the attributes that make me discern, should I apply this strategy here or here or here? Without that mixed practice, the students don't learn how to make those discernments. And so we sat down and we made exercises with mixed items. Well, that's the same thing that happened in my favorite study on interleaving, and it was about elite baseball players. I used this example in Australia, and then I had to talk about what is baseball, but not to you. So, and they were elite. They were at university level, elite, maybe on their way to Omaha to the Baseball World Series for college teams. And they divided the players into two conditions. One condition, they were given the traditional batting practice. So they would, in practice, and they would get 15 balls to hit first, and they were all fastball, fastball, fastball. And then they were given 15 curve, I know nothing about baseball, so it's hanging there. 15 curve, and then 15 change-ups. And the other group had them mixed up. So it might go fastball, fastball, curve, change up, fast, curve. So it was totally mixed together. And the results were easy to measure. They measured it through their batting average, and the batting who had the mixed practice had significant improvements in their batting average, not matched by the traditional practice group. And so what did the researchers say? What they said was, here's the reason that the mixed practice, the interleaving, made you have to think about the critical attributes in the item that would lead to you using a certain strategy. This is something we can so easily do, is add mixed practice. And we have materials that do it. This was from a material that teaches spelling. And then every fifth lesson, they would have mixed rules. So it's not all words where you have a consonant, vowel, consonant, you're dropping the E. No, it might be where you're changing the Y to I, or you're doubling the final consonant. So the kids had to think, should I apply it here or here or here? That is what we have to use for application. So one math program, Saxon Math, you're probably familiar with it. One of its strengths is interleaving. So they have constantly mixed problems. So it's not going to drop out of your repertoire because it's going to keep coming up. And so they have very mixed items from that domain. Well, we're right up to our final time, but this is just a list of questions because I could sit down with the third grade teachers and look at their vocabulary and reading. I could sit down with the eighth grade teachers and look at their teaching of math and ask these questions. Is there first an adequate amount of practice to take them to proficiency? Is there practice that is distributed? Do they have to, in some of the practice, retrieve the information, unscaffolded? Is there variety when we initially teach it? And is there mixed practice subsequently? You know, it's not enough to go through the act of initial instruction. We really need to have retention. That is the measure of learning. Did you learn it? Did you remember it? And we need to put a lot more attention on planning for practice to have this occur. So you hoping that you were reminded of what to look for and that you would be able to take this as a coach or a principal or as a teacher or as an assistant principal to groups of teachers and really say, let's plan our practice for retention to occur.
All right, I think we're at the Q&A part of the webinar. Anita, I have a question that's come in that says, would Dr. Archer consider practice to be rigorous?
Practice to be rigorous. You know, the whole idea about rigor should mean that we want the optimum amount of learning. That would be rigor. Because sometimes we misinterpret rigor like, I'm going to have you write more papers. But rigor should be, are we optimizing the amount of learning and having some higher order learning within that? And so practice certainly can add to the rigor because it's going to add to what you have to retain, and the amount that you retain really sets you up for doing particularly those things that are automatic for higher order. So I don't think you can have rigor in the classroom without following the research on practice.
Terrific. If people have questions, now's a great time to send them on to us. We'll stand by. I've just got the one thus far, Anita.
All right.
We'll stand by for a minute or two and see if anybody else sends
well,
questions.
I will comment more on rigor because I am concerned that we're just saying rigor is introducing a lot more and rigor is giving a lot more papers assigned. And that is not necessarily rigor. Holding you accountable for what I've introduced through practice that you're retaining and thus increasing your ability to do higher order tasks, that to me is rigor. Where I come away as the learner, it needs to be measured in terms of the learner. Wow, I learned so much more. I learned how to analyze this. I learned how, because I got automatic at some things, I could do much higher level thinking. We might.
There is a question that's come in looking for recommendations for ways to encourage practice at home.
Practice at home. Well, there's two things that I would teach all children. Two things right from this webinar. First of all, I would teach them the research on retrieval practice and how to practice. So that if they're studying for a test, that they don't just reread it, that they might read it once and then go back and look at a heading and try to retrieve what was said in that section and then verify it. And then look at another heading, try to retrieve it. Same if they have flashcards. Look at the word, try to retrieve as much as they can, and then check it. Or if they have notes, maybe they have a topic on two call notes, topic and notes, and they fold it over, and they read the topic, and they try to retrieve as much information as possible. Then they peek and get feedback. So I would teach them retrieval practice. Next, I would teach them how to make a schedule for practice so that they know about distributed practice. Don't do it all the night before. You're going to maybe do okay on that test, but you're not going to do okay on the final at the end of the term because it is going to be transitory. It's going to be gone. So let's make a schedule for that practice. So the kids can sort of do their own little study on these two things, retrieval practice and space practice.
Terrific.
Excellent. It's such an excellent way to end Friday. We can go home and spend the weekend planning practice. Or maybe I'm here today in Dallas, Texas, and Texas and Oklahoma are having a big football game today. And so I had to learn what the Sooners were. So I'm going to leave you with trivia because I didn't know this. So in Oklahoma, people lined up and they were to, when they said go or a gun or whatever, they were going to go out and get land and say, it's my land. Well, there were some people who went ahead. They were called the Sooners. They jumped out in advance and got the best properties and got properties. Thus they were called the Sooners. So now I know why that football team is called the Sooners. Isn't life wonderful? How many things we can learn in a day. But I'm going to have to watch a game tomorrow to get a little additional distributed practice on Sooners. So have a wonderful, fall's my favorite season. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for tuning in. And know that this might be a great webinar to watch with your faculty and then to have by grade or by domain, have people sit down and actually write a plan for practice. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Anita, for taking the time to share all these strategies with our webinar guests today. And thanks all of you for joining us. We know you have a full plate, and we hope that the information that you gained here today will be valuable and help you meet your goals with your kiddos in your classrooms.
Thanks so much.